1995, Russia, Rostov region. It was a clear, sunny May Day morning. Everywhere, people were getting ready to celebrate the spring holiday and the start of a long weekend. Some people planned to get a good night's sleep, while others were getting ready to go to their dachas and contribute to peace through hard work. 27-year-old Valentina was one of those who worked on this May Day. She worked as a receiver at the Salsk station, in the town of the same name in the Rostov region. And for some work-related reason, she went out to the access tracks of the road repair and construction department, which ran near the local grain elevator. The area was secluded, people rarely passed by here, but it was broad daylight and nothing foreshadowed any trouble. In high spirits, she was anticipating, looking forward to the weekend. Valentina was heading back to the station when a man cautiously emerged from the thick roadside bushes, gripping some long object in his hand. Suddenly the woman screamed. Someone's strong hands grabbed her from behind, covered her mouth, and something sharp stabbed into her chest, causing excruciating pain. The attacker, using a homemade bayonet inserted into a piece of metal pipe, began stabbing the victim in the chest, the stomach, and the groin. Gradually, the woman's muffled screams turned into hoarse moans and then into death throes. After the victim's death, the criminal, grinning with satisfaction, cut off her genitals and breasts. Then he severed the head and legs from the body. Then he gathered the remains together, as if fitting the separated body parts to each other. He quietly lay down next to them. Later, during interrogations, he would say that he once did the same thing as a child with a cat that had been torn apart. And in both cases, he experienced sexual satisfaction. You are on the Strashnota channel, and today's story is of one of the most terrifying maniacs in Russia. Authentic forensic materials and the account of the investigator who conducted the interrogation were used in the making of this video. Today, we'll go to the end of winter, the beginning of spring in 1995 in one of the southern regions of Russia. At that time, here's what was happening. The residents of the Rostov region had barely recovered from the high-profile crimes of Chikatilo. Numerous articles and reports about his capture and execution had not yet disappeared from the pages of newspapers and TV screens. When the people of the Don learned that another bloody maniac was operating in their region, subtitle editor, Volgodonsk, Shahty, Salsk. In this relatively small area, people are once again disappearing and dying at the hands of an unknown person. He attacks women, striking them with a metal pipe or stabbing them with a knife, and takes anything of value. The residents of the region have once again lost their peace of mind, and the detectives are exhausted, working through one lead after another. Imagine the detectives' surprise when it turned out that the robberies, murders, and even some ordinary thefts from homes, schools, and stores were all committed by the same person. And it was a stroke of luck that helped connect all these seemingly unrelated and different criminal cases into a single investigation. The terrifying story of this serial killer began back in the 1990s, although many of those involved still remember those events as clearly as if they happened yesterday. I managed to talk to one of the eyewitnesses, an investigator who personally interrogated the maniac. It all began on a frosty February day in 1995 on the 15th in the city of Volgodonsk. Around 3 p.m., someone knocked on apartment 24 of building number 95 on Lenin Street, where a certain Dorofeyev lived. Behind the door was Dorofeyev's older brother on his mother's side. Of course, they let the relative in. You wouldn't send someone out in such cold. At that time in the apartment were the brother and his female friend named Yegorova, along with her neighbor Natasha Glukaryova, who was not yet 18. They were watching a movie on the video player. The guest who arrived under the pretext that he was interested in the movie sat down next to the teenage girl. Then he leaned toward her and whispered something in her ear. Glukaryova looked at the young man in surprise, and then quickly started getting ready to leave, saying as she left that she would wait for her companion outside. After a while, Dorofeyev's brother also went outside after the girl. No one ever saw Natasha alive again. And the man she left with was the very same one. The girl's remains would only be found after the maniac's confession, which he would give much later, leading the police to them himself. According to the forensic examination, the 8 bones found were the skeletal remains of a single person, aged 10 to 14 years old, with an estimated height of 130 to 150 centimeters. That is, based on their anthropological characteristics, these remains match the data of Natalia Glukaryova. The girl's body was identified by the charred remains of a jacket and boots found nearby. They were recognized by the grandmother of the deceased Natasha. What exactly happened to the child is not known for certain. According to the accused, in a conversation with Natasha, he promised her money and to buy her things. Then he suggested that the girl go outside and wait for him near the house. 12-летняя Natalia. Without hesitation, she agreed. Deceiving Natasha, he took her to a remote place near the Simlyansky ship repair plant, where he assaulted and brutally killed her. He threw the body into the reed thickets of a ravine and got rid of her clothes as well. He burned some of them and threw her boots into a quarry. The second incident involving the same criminal took place on February 20th, 1995. In the evening after dinner, a 50-year-old resident of the city of Shakhty named Ivaneshka was returning to the site where she worked as a night watchwoman. It was a house under construction. Suddenly, she saw a young man trying to cross the road, and right before her eyes, he was almost hit by a car. This happened in the settlement of Shakhty Yuzhnaya on Gromovaya Street. The man lost his balance and fell onto the roadway. Kind-hearted Ivaneshka couldn't leave her fellow human in trouble and hurried to help. The woman bent over the man lying on the ground. He looked a bit disheveled and reeked of alcohol from a mile away, but Ivaneshka wasn't bothered by that. Anything can happen in life. It wasn't in her nature to judge others. But instead of words of gratitude, the drunk sprawled on the road suddenly jerked his arm and stabbed something sharp into her stomach. Her legs trembled, and she began to slowly sink to the ground. A sharp pain, a bright flash, then another blow, and then another and another, until the light in Ivaneshka's eyes finally faded away. In total, the criminal stabbed her 17 times, and when he saw that the woman was no longer showing signs of life, he dragged her body across the nearby railroad tracks and began to mock the corpse. On March 7th, 1995, in the city of Shakhty, random passers-by discovered the naked body of an elderly man. She didn't die right away. It was slower, stronger, stronger, stronger. Later identified as Ivaneshka with numerous lacerations, couldn't kill. One of them managed to survive. Unfortunately, due to certain restrictions, I can't show some documentary materials, so I'll leave them in the Telegram channel Strashnota. Go ahead, subscribe and watch. The forensic expert's report stated, death occurred as a result of blunt craniocerebral trauma with fractures of the vault and base of the skull, brain contusion, and cerebral hemorrhage. Multiple stab and cut wounds were also found on the body in the area of the abdomen, perineum, and genitals, with traumatic removal of the small intestine and uterus. The serial killer whom we are talking about today was quite the drunkard. After another heavy drinking session, he woke up around 7 a.m. on April 4th, 1995, near the Eternal Flame in the village of Kamenolomny. Remember, it's not far from the city of Shakhty. Barely opening his eyes and seeing that a woman nearby was opening the grocery store, he followed her inside and attacked her there. With a bayonet mounted on a pipe, the man struck the saleswoman in various parts of her body, resulting in her death. The maniac cold-bloodedly hid her body in the meat department's storage room, after which he calmly stocked up on goods. He took more than 200,000 rubles worth, taking alcohol and expensive snacks first, and then left the scene. The mutilated body of the saleswoman Tyrina was found in the meat department's cold storage room a few hours later. Description of the forensic examination. The body has multiple stab and incised penetrating wounds to the chest and abdomen, with damage to the lungs, liver, and stomach. Death occurred due to massive blood loss and exsanguination of the internal organs. All bodily injuries were inflicted while the person was still alive. On April 16th, the maniac was once again completely drunk and climbed into the stadium in the village of Kamenolomny, where an orienteering competition was taking place that day. At one point, Lena Vinogradova, who was 13 years old, slowed down next to him. She was checking the area. «С картой у себя в руках». The girl had her back to the man. And suddenly the man rushed at her and stabbed her in the lower back with a bayonet, causing Lena to fall and lose consciousness for a while. The attacker didn't realize she was unconscious, so he grabbed the child by the head and started covering her mouth with his hands. But at that moment, Lena regained consciousness and, seeing the attacker looming over her, kicked him with all her strength. The girl managed to get away, push the attacker off her, and run as fast as she could toward the people standing in the distance, so the maniac had to retreat. Lena Vinogradova was extremely lucky. She survived and soon received medical assistance. If she hadn't regained consciousness and started fiercely resisting, the criminal would have carried out his plan to the end, and there would have been one more lost soul on his record. After this unfortunate incident, the criminal lay low for 2 weeks. But already on the morning of May 1st, after getting drunk again, this time in the city of Salsk, he took another woman's life, assaulted her and dismembered her. This episode was at the beginning of my story. Her name was Valentina Stefan. From the Forensic Medical Examination Report. Death occurred due to massive external and internal blood loss, which developed as a result of multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen with damage to both lungs and the liver, inflicted while she was still alive. A story about the lower limbs, mammary glands, and external genital organs. But the criminal did not stop there and went to the Salsk city cemetery, where he started drinking again. After getting quite drunk late at night near the Dorozhny garage complex, after the repair and construction department, the maniac made another outing. This time, his victims were Falco's daughter and mother, who were walking home along the railroad tracks from the cemetery, where they had gone for a religious holiday. When he caught up with the woman and the girl, the serial killer stabbed Galia, who was 15, twice with a sharp bayonet. She turned around in horror and managed to see the terrifying man in the darkness. There was something sharp and shiny in his hands. The mother tried to pull the maniac away from her child and cried out in despair, "Run, my daughter!" Driven by her mother's screams, the wounded Galia ran with the last of her strength, and the criminal stabbed 39-year-old Valentina in the stomach with a bayonet and pushed her away. Then he chased after the girl, but after a while he stopped and returned to her mother, who was lying on the ground. He began to viciously stab her with the bayonet in different parts of her body until he stabbed her to death. After that, he took all her valuables and tried to escape. But by that time, Galia had already managed to run to people and ask for help. She was shaking all over and kept repeating that they were attacked by a monster with blue hands. At that time, the maniac hid in the thick bushes near the cemetery, deciding to wait out the active search. But soon, a flashlight beam sweeping the area caught him in the darkness. He instinctively raised his hands up, shielding his eyes from the bright light. That's when the men saw those very same blue hands of the monster. The criminal's forearms were completely covered with blurred prison tattoos. That's how the maniac was caught and immobilized by a man named Yefanov. It was to him that Galina, bleeding heavily, ran, and she asked for help. By the time the police arrived, the criminal found in the bushes was handed over after being caught red-handed. Poor Galina, who found shelter in a nearby building, later said that she saw her mother's executioner finishing off his victim. From the forensic medical examination reports, the death of Valentina Falco was caused by massive external and internal blood loss resulting from multiple penetrating stab wounds to the chest and abdomen with damage to both lungs and the liver. A total of 17 such wounds were found on Falco's body, inflicted with a stabbing and cutting weapon with a single-edged blade. Galina Falco has a stab wound on the left side of her chest, penetrating into the chest and abdominal cavity with damage to the diaphragm and stomach, transverse ligamentous injuries and stab wounds in the right gluteal region. That is, serious bodily injuries that were life-threatening at the time they were inflicted. That's how, on May 1st, in the city of Salsk-Rostov region, random passers-by helped the police apprehend and catch this maniac red-handed. It turned out to be Vladimir Anatolyevich Mukhankin, a 35-year-old with a previous criminal record. By that time, he had already spent half his life behind bars. Having gone down the wrong path at the age of 13, he clearly wasn't in a hurry to turn his life around. But here's what's surprising. The recidivist thief decided to switch to being a murderer. For the criminal world, this is nonsense, because a self-respecting criminal who has once chosen his path would never switch to another and get his hands dirty with blood. That's not respected at all in prison, or at least it wasn't respected before. In general, the criminal's behavior was quite puzzling, and at first the detectives had a thorough conversation with the detainee. It turned out that Vladimir didn't have a permanent place of residence, and in fact he was homeless. And sometimes he spent the night at his acquaintances' places, including in the city of Shakhty and in the village of Kamenolomny in the Oktyabrski rural district. He passed this information to the relevant police departments for verification. On May 5th, a young detective from the Oktyabrski rural district arrived in Salsk. Hearing that among those detained was Mukhankin, who had previously been convicted of theft, the detective decided to check him just in case for involvement in unsolved similar crimes in his jurisdiction. Vladimir, of course, denied everything. Go look for fools somewhere else. I won't take the blame for someone else's crimes, but I'll answer for my own. Mukhankin snapped back with a crooked smirk. The investigator realized he'd come across a tough nut to crack, but he himself was no slouch either, so the detective decided to take a different approach. Seeing that the usual methods weren't working, and that the detainee was hostile to official communication, the investigator decided to try to win him over. He brought food into the interrogation room and offered Mukhankin something to eat. Vladimir raised his eyebrow in surprise and asked suspiciously, "What's this all about, officer?" "Arrested people are still human, even if they're crooks," the officer replied dryly. "But if you don't want it, you can refuse. It's up to you. I just wanted to treat you like a human being, but if you're squeamish about sharing a piece of bread with a cop, I won't insist." Seeing the appetizing food on the table, Vladimir swallowed hard. "When will I ever eat something this tasty again?" he muttered, and then added loudly, "What the hell, have a seat, boss, let's break bread together. A cop is a person too, after all." So the detective and the criminal ate in silence for a while, studying each other with probing looks. Then, as if by accident, a bottle appeared on the table. After having a drink, Mukhankin relaxed and no longer saw the policeman sitting across from him as a mortal enemy, and quite willingly began to answer the carefully posed questions. At first, Vladimir was evasive, but then he directly confirmed that many of the robberies and other thefts in the city of Shakhty and the Oktyabrski rural district were his doing. Satisfied with the result, the officer decided to build on his success and finally, almost intuitively, asked, "And why did you take that woman's life in the mines?" And then came a completely unexpected answer. "Which one exactly? I didn't just kill one there, one in winter, another in spring. Which one are you interested in?" The detective's hair stood on end. The random remark hit the mark exactly. The officer Now he was staring in amazement at the frail little man sitting across from him. The 35-year-old criminal was the same age as him. But now there was no trace left of the sullen, downtrodden man he had found here in the morning. Now, sitting before him was a smug executioner bursting with the desire to boast about his crimes. The policeman began mentally going over the homicide reports from the past 6 months and started calculating possible matches in his mind. There was no room for error here. If the criminal realizes that he just hit the target by chance, then the fish will immediately slip off the hook. The bets are placed, no more bets. The detective, catching his breath, clarified that the bodies were found with the pipe in one place. "Ah, I see what caught your interest," Mukhankin said with a meaningful smirk. "I don't even know myself why I'm doing all this. It seemed like my girlfriend and I just agreed to rob her, but then something came over me. That's why I did it. And then I had to take care of her daughter too, so she wouldn't talk."
I remember stuffing something between her legs, thinking that something weird might come out, and to prevent that, I stuffed it between her legs.
The detective tensed up. He hadn't heard anything about a girl losing her life in the mines, but he did recall something from the reports about a missing girl not too long ago. Could it really be his doing? The detective didn't even raise an eyebrow, pretending to be fully aware of all the villain's crimes. Barely managing to control his quickened breathing, he continued the questioning. "Well, that's obvious he wanted to steal. And why did you need a woman in February?" "Oh, but here it was purely for my own pleasure. You have to separate, however, Citizen Chief, work and pleasure." "That's exactly what I'm doing, separating them." The detective fell silent, digesting what he'd heard. Everything pointed to the fact that sitting in front of him was not just an ordinary drunk who had accidentally killed someone in a drunken stupor, but a real serial killer, and a maniac at that, since he actually enjoyed it, and the facts didn't hide it. "What? Are you trying to become the next Chikatilo?" the detective finally asked Mukhankin, barely holding back his rising anger. An even more shocking answer followed. "If you find out about all my exploits, you'll think Chikatilo was a child compared to me." Mukhankin's eyes flashed with an unhealthy fire. "In just 2 months, I took care of more people than Chikatilo could ever dream of." And then the detective began to realize the scale of the tragedy. If Mukhankin had been moving between nearby cities over the past few months, it was quite likely that all the similar brutal killings there were committed by him. "How could you ever compare to Chikatilo?" The officer smirked, looking straight into Vladimir's eyes, who was puffed up like a turkey. "You don't have the guts." "Me? You?" The criminal was at a loss for words. "In just 1 year, I cut up 8 people. With these very hands, I did things to them you can't imagine." "So what about you?" The detective kept mocking him. "No one will ever find out about it anyway." "But they still write about Chikatilo in the newspapers, and what will they say about you? Well, there was this petty crook and thief, Vova Mukhankin. But he killed some woman while drunk, and he cut her daughter a little with a knife. That's all. You know? Times are like that now. Every single day someone is tortured. Every single day. So one more corpse, one less, it doesn't matter." Mukhankin turned crimson with anger. The muscles in his face twitched. "Take me to the prosecutor right now," the detainee suddenly blurted out. "Why is that?" "I'm going to write a confession," Vladimir muttered through his teeth. "We'll see who's the petty crook here." Of course, the detective didn't need much convincing. The detainee's wish to write a confession was immediately reported to the prosecutor of the city of Salsk. And it was at the prosecutor's office that Mukhankin confessed to the murders he had committed. A girl with the last name Glukaryova, whose body he left in the reeds near Tsimlyansk. A man with the last name Ustinov, the former partner of his girlfriend. An elderly woman named Ivanishko in the area of Gromova Street in Shakhty, an acquaintance of his girlfriend and her daughter Galina and Elena Miroshnikova. A shop assistant at the village store, Maturina, and 2 women in Salsk, Stefan and Falko. He also spoke about attempts to take the lives of teenage girls, Vinogradova and Falko. Vladimir also confessed to 2 armed attacks on women, Bistrova and Sazonova, in Tsimlyansk. When making this statement, Mukhankin answered his lawyer's question by saying that he took this step himself without any pressure from law enforcement. At that time, these facts were not only unknown to the police, but even the bodies of Natasha Glukhareva, Lena Miroshnikova, and Ustinov had not yet been found, and criminal cases regarding their deaths had not been initiated. Therefore, there could be no talk of any setup or false accusation by the police or the prosecutor's office. So, by playing on the weakness of an ambitious criminal who wanted to go down in criminal history, the police officers managed to get one of the most brutal serial killers of that time to talk. If you want even more videos, go to Boosty if you're from Russia and Patreon if you're not from Russia. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube. The links are below the video. During the investigation, details of Mukhankin's other crimes also came to light. On February 23rd in the city of Shakti on Kalturina Street, the criminal met a local resident, Ustinov, whom he had not known before, and he asked if he knew about any nearby places for rent. Ustinov brought his new acquaintance to his place, to house number 51 on Kalturina Street, where he lived with his partner Levchenko and her young son. That same evening, a drunken fight broke out between the lodger and the owner. During the altercation, the guest stabbed the homeowner with a bayonet. As a result, the homeowner died. However, this did not bother his partner at all. She first had passionate sex with the maniac right next to the cooling corpse of her recent lover. And then she helped the guest carry the corpse to the shed, where the lodger dismembered the body.
I grabbed him by the scruff and threw him down. I grabbed him, pinned him down, and told him to stay put. Lena shouted, "Give it to him, give him your thing." Then I snapped. As far as I remember, I was beating him. That's it, I beat him there. Apparently I stabbed him a million times or so. And in the morning, she started coming on to me again. That's it, I had already started walking around. Maybe it was around 8 or 10 o'clock. It's closed and dark in there. There, on me, that's what happened. She got into my underwear, touching and squeezing, then started bouncing. Well, basically I screwed her.
Then, together with Levchenko, they carried the dismembered body to the Grushevka River, where they buried the remains in different places. After committing the crime, the guest stayed to live with Levchenko in the house of the murdered Emustinov. After the criminal's confession and indication of the burial site, the police managed to find only the remains of the human torso. During the expert examination, the exact cause of death of the victim, Emustinov, was not established. The examination only indicated that the injuries in the area of the end of the right shoulder blade, on the articular surface of the left shoulder blade, and in the area of the distal ends of the right and left femur were caused by the action of a sharp blade, and the separation of the arms and legs was done with a sharp blade, possibly an axe. The remaining parts of the body could not be found, partly because Levchenko herself was unable to specify exactly where she had buried the other parts of her partner's corpse. Levchenko, when questioned later, revealed other details of this crime. According to her, Ustinov began to suspect her of having an intimate relationship with Mukhankin, which led to an argument between the men, and then they started fighting. Vladimir ran out into the hallway and came back with a bayonet. He attacked the owner of the house and started stabbing him with the bayonet wherever he could until the man died. Levchenko insisted that Mukhankin himself was the one who took Ustinov's life and that she only helped to move and bury the remains and kept silent about what had been done, because she was afraid of Vladimir and what he might do to her and her child. But the joint crimes of the newly formed couple did not end there. On March 19th, Mukhankin and Levchenko visited her acquaintance, Galina Miroshnikova, who lived on Steklova Street in the city of Shakti. After her recent divorce, Miroshnikova started drinking, and various marginal individuals often visited her. The guests drank together with the hostess, and when the alcohol ran out, they decided to go with Miroshnikova and her 8-year-old daughter Lena to Levchenko's home on Kalturina Street. There they continued drinking. After putting Lena and the hostess's young son to bed, Levchenko and her partner suggested to the guest that they go for a walk before going to sleep. The woman, to her misfortune, agreed. Levchenko and Miroshnikova walked ahead, while Mukhankin trailed behind as if reluctantly. When they started to descend toward the roadway on Pobedi Revolutsy Street, Vladimir, who was walking behind, stabbed Galina in the neck with a bayonet. And when she fell, he exposed her body and began stabbing her in the chest and abdomen with the bayonet. Then, as was his habit, he began to abuse her, stabbing her in the vagina with the bayonet and pushing a steel pipe in there as well. Miroshnikova died from the injuries she sustained. The criminal took off her expensive coat, gold jewelry and watch and gave all these things to Levchenko. Then the two of them went back to the murdered Galina's house. They got in using the stolen key and took out everything that could be sold. The only problem was the victim's daughter, who was still peacefully sleeping in Levchenko's house. Without much hesitation, Vladimir stabbed the sleeping girl multiple times with a bayonet, then calmly tore the gold earrings from her ears. He took the little body on a cart to the spoil tip of the Krasinskaya mine, where he covered it with stones and rock. The naked body of Galina Miroshnikova, showing signs of abuse, was discovered on March 20th in the bushes near Pobedi Revolutsy Avenue. According to the forensic examination, Galina Miroshnikova died as a result of multiple penetrating stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, with damage to the heart and other internal organs, massive internal bleeding, and acute anemia of the internal organs. The abuse was expressed in inflicting at least 13 injuries with a sharp object through the victim's vagina shortly before her death. The remains of Galina Miroshnikova's 8-year-old daughter were found later during a crime scene reenactment based on the defendant's testimony. According to the forensic medical examination, the study of the remains established that the bones belonged to a child aged 7 to 11 years. The cause of death cannot be determined due to partial mummification and almost complete skeletonization of the body. The burial period ranges from 1.5 months to 2 years. Later, when Levchenko was questioned, she told investigators that when she and Mukhankin returned to her place after stealing things from Miroshnikova's house, it turned out that the children were not sleeping as soundly anymore. Vladimir said that the girl needed to be gotten rid of. Since Levchenko was worried about herself and her son, she got dressed and took him out of the house, and when she returned, little Lena was no longer there. Mukhankin told her that he had taken the girl's life and that he took the body and buried it at the foot of one of the city's slag heaps. Her partner ordered her to wash the blood-stained pillowcase and blanket on the bed where Lena had slept, and Levchenko had to do it. A little later, a witness was found to one of the killings committed by Mukhankin. A woman named Tunelskaya said that as she was walking to work that morning, she passed by the supermarket and noticed that the store's door was slightly open. She clearly remembered a strange man peeking out from behind the door and looking around, whom she later identified as Mukhankin. In general, regarding Mukhankin's personality, his key traits include a deeply sadistic tendency. He derived sexual satisfaction from inflicting suffering, taking lives, and subsequently manipulating the bodies of his victims, which was vividly demonstrated by the dismemberment of bodies and the abuse of corpses. He himself drew parallels between taking a woman's life and similar actions with a cat in his childhood, which points to long-standing and deep-rooted sadistic tendencies. He also exhibits antisocial personality disorder, which is expressed in a complete lack of empathy and remorse. Mukhankin described taking lives with cynicism and pride, was a pathological liar and manipulator, and ignored all social norms. And his life, from the age of 13, was continuously filled with new crimes. His motives were largely determined by exaggerated narcissism and vanity. The psychiatric evaluation identified an exaggerated drive for self-assertion as the key factor. He craved recognition and fame even in the role of a cruel maniac. The comparison to Chikatilo, whom he called a chicken, hurt his pride and prompted him to make boastful confessions to prove his own significance. This also reveals his pathological thirst for attention and legacy. Reading about Chikatilo awakened the dormant instinct of a maniac in him, and he consciously sought to surpass him, to enter the annals of crime. Emotional immaturity and infantilism were evident in the fact that his actions were driven by primitive impulses, anger, and a thirst for immediate pleasures. His bitterness, bordering on hatred, was, in the opinion of experts, a result of his inability to constructively solve life's problems. Mukhankin also demonstrated a tendency to feign, trying to pretend to have a mental illness after his arrest, claiming to hear voices and see visions, but the examination found him sane. Alcohol was a constant catalyst for his crimes, further weakening his already poor impulse control. As for his accomplice Levchenko, she became an active partner of Mukhankin in a series of murders and thefts. After the murder of Ustinov, her partner, she not only failed to report it to the police, but also engaged in relations with Mukhankin next to the body, then helped him move and dismember the corpse, and even bury the remains. Later, together with Mukhankin, she participated in another crime, and then they robbed the victim's house. Thus, Vladimir Mukhankin represents an archetypal example of a sadistic serial killer necrophile with traits of antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders. His psychology is a combination of extreme cruelty, pathological vanity, a complete lack of empathy, and a thirst for self-assertion through absolute power over his victims. His motivation was existential. By taking lives, he tried to gain power and significance, seeking to leave behind a bloody trail that would surpass the crimes of his predecessor. During the investigation, another curious fact came to light. Mukhankin was inspired to commit his brutal crimes by the deeds of Chikatilo. While serving his last sentence, Vladimir read articles about this motive, about fellow countrymen maniacs. The misadventures of Andrei Romanovich didn't make Mukhankin shudder in horror at all. On the contrary, they awakened the dormant instincts of a killer in him. And soon Vladimir decided that he should become a worthy successor to the bloody deeds of the master, who was executed by firing squad on February 14, 1994. Mukhankin began his own bloody path almost exactly a year later, on February 15, 1995. A number of examinations were conducted on Mukhankin, partly because the accused later actively pretended to be insane and spoke about visions and voices that were haunting him. According to the expert's report, Mukhankin was found to have psychopathy in the form of sadism in a compensated stage, which does not qualify as an acute mental illness. Therefore, at the time of committing the crimes, he did not have a pathological mental disorder and was able to control his actions and understand their nature. According to psychiatrists, the key factor behind Vladimir's criminal violence was an exaggerated desire for self-assertion. The characteristics of his personality and life circumstances caused him to become embittered, bordering on hatred. Therefore, the judicial panel of the Rostov Regional Court concluded that Mukhankin committed the crime while being fully sane and on December 11, 1996 sentenced him to death. But due to the moratorium, the highest penalty was replaced with life imprisonment to be served in the Black Dolphin penal colony. That is exactly where, to this day, Vladimir Mukhankin remains, surrounded by other dangerous criminals like himself. At first, the maniac tried to prove to everyone that being in the Black Dolphin was a joy for him, and he even wrote a letter about it to the editorial office of the newspaper Argumenti I Fakti. But over time, the maniac's cheerfulness faded somewhat, and according to his own words, he began to dream of death. But Levchenko, the accomplice of this successor of Chikatilo, did not receive any punishment at all. The criminal case against her was suspended due to her illness. There is no information about the resumption of proceedings in this woman's case.